Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam, folks. I'm so excited today to be joined by Mr. Don Munson, the longtime voice of the Clemson Tigers. He's actually been associated with the university since 1994, an App State graduate as well. Mr. Munson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah. First of all, you need to just call me Don. Okay. Let's just get that out of the way. Let's just call Don. Just call me Don. But no, great to be with you.
For sure, Don. Well, let's start with how have you been handling this pandemic? I mean, this is something that has uprooted our lives, both personally, professionally. So, how have you been handling this whole situation the last year or so?
Well, and we just found out today that Clemson's basketball program goes into a pause. So we were supposed to play Wednesday at Notre Dame, and we'll miss that road game. So beyond that, don't know. But I guess I've been like everybody else. Is that you just gotta you go with the flow, handle the punches, don't let it get you down. I know that for a lot of people, it's been mentally probably as trying as anything that they've ever gone through in their lives. But for me, it's actually been a really good thing. To be honest with you, it's allowed me here at the house to really kind of get back in touch with everything that's going on here. With not only with my wife, we also have a special needs daughter, so it's been great. I've been helping her with all of her therapies and taking her to therapy and stuff. So it's got me back in touch with a lot of that kind of stuff, and um, you know, and then I think it just makes you appreciate when you actually do have an event that hey soak up every minute of it, every last ounce of it that you can, soak it up and appreciate it for what it is.
That's awesome to hear. And I wanted to ask you, how did this association with Clemson start? I mean, you've been there since 1994. It's been a long time. You've seen so many things happen, so many great players, so many great memories. But how did this association start all the way back in 1994?
Well, it started actually in '93. That's when the folks that at that time were running the Clemson radio network heard me on air. I was actually subbing and doing a Furman football broadcast. Furman University, just right up the road from us here at Clemson. At that time, both Clemson and Furman were owned by the same entity, and so the folks on the Clemson side heard me, and they actually called me and asked me if I would be interested in coming and working for Clemson at the time, and I said absolutely. So that was the winter of '93, and so then that kind of started things. And by the fall of '94, I started hosting basically what was the post game show, what we call the fifth quarter show. It's a 2 hour scoreboard show, and so that's where it began in 1994 for me.
And then, of course, you've been the play-by-play voice for the radio for Clemson football and basketball since about the 2013-14 season. I have to ask you, what was it like to be on the call for that 2016 national championship game against Alabama? I mean, the year before, the Tigers had suffered a heartbreaking loss to the Crimson Tide. You come back that year and you end up beating Alabama, including capped off by a Hunter Renfrow game-winning catch, but with 1 second left. I mean, what was it like, your emotions, to call such a great game?
Well, I mean, I think that going into Tampa and into that contest, I think all of us on the Clemson side of things knew that we had a legitimate shot to go in and win. Now, a lot of people, if you look at obviously the national pundits, weren't giving us that shot. I think that Clemson actually may have gone into that ball game as something around an 8 to 9 point underdog. So when Vegas puts out those kinds of odds, you know that you're severely you're not too many people laying down much money on you from that standpoint. But then just to see, it was a 14-0 game early on. Alabama had gotten out to a lead, and actually they held what was it, a 10-point lead going into the fourth quarter. And it was interesting because the year before, Clemson was up 10 and 15 out in Arizona against them and couldn't hang on. So it turned out that Alabama, was the one that couldn't hang on going in. So it was interesting from that point. But I kind of knew in the back of my mind, just because I'd seen Deshaun Watson and that offense kind of do it throughout the entire year. You give them 201 is what he had when he took the ball over at the 33-yard line. But you give him that much time, chances are with the weapons that he had, he was going to be able to drive it downfield. And heck, they were at the Alabama 40-yard line, or actually inside the 40-yard line, with a minute 50 something left in the game. So at that point, you felt, all right, they needed a field goal to tie, touchdown to win. And certainly when they got the pass down to Jordan Leggett, that was down around the 10-yard line, the pass interference call then in the end zone that set them up at the 2. But that was just with 6 seconds left. So they only had a minute time to get that play done and then make sure they had time for a field goal. But there wasn't a whole lot of doubt in my mind that somehow they were going to figure out a way to pull it off.
What is your mind like mentally going into that last drive? I mean, I know you're not preparing anything because you're not trying to make it sound scripted. And obviously, there's always a chance that something could happen against the Tigers. So, how are you preparing yourself mentally going into that drive, knowing with Deshaun Watson and that offense, they've got a chance to do something special?
Well, I mean, you find out that every game that you do, and the older I get, the more I realize this is that it really is play to play. You just have to stick play to play. You can't get caught looking too far ahead, and you can't get caught looking behind either. But Coach Sweeney has this saying here inside the program. He calls it windshield mentality. You just have to worry about what's right in front of you. Forget what's in the rearview mirror. You can't get caught looking miles down the road. You just got to take it really play to play. And it always is going to be in championship games in particular. Usually it comes down to 2 or 3 plays that make a difference. And Clemson was able to make those 2 or 3 plays on that drive that made the difference and gave them a national championship.
And then 2 years later, you guys end up beating Alabama again, 44-16. I know you cover the team and you're very well entrenched within that program, but how surprised were you to see it be a blowout? I mean, Trevor Lawrence, as a freshman, a true freshman, is able to go out there. Justin Ross has a big game. I mean, I know you cover the team, but how surprised were you to see a blowout of that magnitude in the national championship game?
Well, again, I thought that Clemson was going to go into that game and figure out a way to win. And I think even now going into that game, Clemson was a 10-point or more underdog to Alabama. Some people were calling it, that Alabama team, the greatest team ever in college football history. But obviously, when A.J. Terrell picks off the pass, returns it for the pick six, they set the tone early, even though Alabama would come back and take a lead. But right after they took the lead, Clemson got the football and drove it right down the field. ETN scored a touchdown to reclaim the lead. And they got another pass interception against Tungavaloa, and were able to turn that one into points. And all of a sudden, when Clemson got to a double-digit advantage, got to really a 2-possession advantage in that game, and particularly at the end of the first half when Saban had the football around his own 30-yard line, about 38 seconds, and didn't use his timeouts, kind of waved the white flag a little bit. Let's get to the locker room. Let's rehuddle and let's figure this out. No, then I knew that things were going well. Obviously, they got the football first to start the third quarter, came up empty on a fake field goal, and Clemson again scored right after that, the Justin Ross touchdown. And once he got to 3 scores, I figured no way was Clemson going to let this thing get away from him, particularly with that defensive front that Clemson had that season.
I have to ask you about Dabo Swinney. I mean, here's a guy who's not only one of the best coaches in college football, but one of the most recognized sports faces really nationally. I mean, you get to see him in a more personal setting. How do you describe how he's like kind of in a personal setting and the interactions you've had with him?
He's exactly what you see. I mean, there really is not any difference from him on camera and off camera, to be perfectly honest with you. One of the advantages, I think, one of the real advantages that I have as the play-by-play guy at Clemson is that the 4 years prior to me becoming the play-by-play guy, I actually worked for Coach Sweeney and on his staff. So I was inside the football offices starting in 2010 and then until the summer of 2014. And those years inside really made me understand all the intricacies that go into what a sport does, particularly like a sport like football. But it's helped me also with basketball, and it's helped me with baseball because it allowed me also kind of access to those head coaches and to those programs that as just a reporter or somebody working for a radio station or a television station, I never would have gotten. So, but to kind of get back to the crux of what you're asking, Dabo Swinney is the same today as he was yesterday and as he's going to be tomorrow. There's nothing that's really going to change about him.
And I also have to ask you about a few famous Clemson players you've had a chance to cover. Do you have a great Deshaun Watson story?
It's funny because my wife and I always laugh. The first time that we were really around, that I was around Deshaun, was we have a signing day dinner that happens. And at that time, so Deshaun shows up, so he shows up in January. He's an early enrollee, shows up in January. And so we have it on on that same night as signing day back then on that first Wednesday in February. And so we get this, we're sitting at the same table with him and we're looking across and we're just thinking, who is this? I mean, he just looked like he looked so young, but he had such a presence about him. And so all the signees were there and they all have to get up and talk in front of an audience of about 400 people that are there. And from that moment, you could just tell that Deshaun was one of those guys, whatever the it factor is and whatever that confidence level that he has in and of himself, that all right, this guy is something a little bit different. And then it certainly went on to play out that way. I say the same thing about Trevor as I do about Deshaun. I've never seen a point where Deshaun stepped on a football field and took a step backwards. It always seems to me like he was always making a step forward.
And you mentioned Trevor Lawrence there. That was going to be my next question. Do you have anything great you could share about Trevor Lawrence and your time covering him?
Well, Trevor was one of those guys. I mean, even being around him in recruiting and that kind of stuff, you just knew this guy was just built differently. I mean, they don't make him 6'6". I think when he got here, he was around 205 pounds. So you knew that he was going to put some weight on that frame. He had this unbelievable arm, but he also had this, again, a lot like Deshaun, this demeanor about him. He's much quieter than Deshaun, which I don't know that and Deshaun was quiet, but this guy is even quieter than Deshaun was, and that he shows up and he's the quarterback of that 16 team now that wins the national championship. Usually, the quarterback of a national championship team is the faceplate of that team, but because of Christian Wilkins, because of Cleveland Ferrell, Dexter Lawrence, along with Austin Bryant up front, those were the faces of and the controller of the locker room of that Clemson program. And he played it wonderfully. I mean, and those guys understood that they needed him as quarterback. There's a great story where the day that they announced that Trevor is going to be now the starting quarterback at Clemson 4 games into and leading into the Syracuse game was the first game that Christian called Trevor and they went to breakfast together and they sat down and, kind of talked across the table to one another. And Christian was, talking to him, okay, we need you, but we're going to be there to support you. And Trevor was able to share with him, some of the concerns and some of the obviously what he felt like that he could do for the team. And that was really, it was funny how over a breakfast table and just communication is a lesson for all of us, that how a team can grow from that standpoint and let it lead to great things.
And the final player I wanted to ask you about is Mike Williams, and kind of a bigger point. I mean, he kind of continued this tradition of so many great Clemson receivers. I mean, you think about DeAndre Hopkins, Sammy Watkins, Martavis Bryant, Mike Williams. I mean, so many great Clemson receivers. It's just like, how did they find all these guys?
Well, and I understand the accolades that Nuke is getting right now because, he probably is the best wide receiver in the National Football League. I understand the accolades that Sammy got when he got here. I mean, the very first time that he touches a football in a collegiate game, he takes it into the end zone, his freshman year for a touchdown. But I'm not so sure that Mike Williams may not have been the best of the lot to come through here. I mean, just from where he started to where he ended up, to go through the neck injury in particular and be able to rebound from that, both mentally and physically, and come back, and then obviously made just gigantic plays throughout the entire season, particularly on that last drive in 2016 to lead Clemson to a national championship. I mean, and he's showing it on the next level as well. I mean, this is a special dude, and again, a guy that is very confident in and of himself. A guy also that just has no ego about him. There's just zero ego about him. He's one of the greatest servant leaders that I can remember being on a Clemson football team.
And I wanted to ask you this question, Don, because I've asked this question to other broadcasters, but you're the guy who's kind of uniquely with the best team. I mean, college football, since the implementation of the playoff, really seems like there's only been a couple of teams, your Tigers, Alabama, you sprinkle in Ohio State, Oklahoma. I mean, do you understand, I guess, the conversation some people argue about, there's not enough parity, we've got to do more to increase parity, or, being that you have the perspective as the Tigers radio voice, your point is, look, this just shows you how dominant Clemson and Alabama are, and it's up to other teams to be able to recruit and ultimately beat them.
Well, it's not Alabama's and it's not Clemson's fault that this is the way that it is. It's up to the other teams to get to this point. Again, I always, Coach Swinney I've been with him in the locker room 1,000 times. Guys, we are going to play to our level. And if the other team doesn't play to our level, that's not our fault. That's their fault. Now, Clemson and Alabama right now, obviously, every time they take the field, they have this huge target on them. This team, Alabama as well, they know how to handle it now. They had to learn and grow how to handle that, but they now know how to handle that. And sometimes it is just the name that is on the front of the jersey that it comes out there and beats people. And it's at those moments that you can almost sense it coming as well. That programs build up so much to that game. There's so much focus on playing Clemson and all the buildup that you see throughout the week in the media and social media channels, and that you just know, nope, these cats ain't going to get it done because it's too big. The stage is too big. The light is too bright for them. And both of these programs, both Clemson and Alabama, and I think that we're seeing Ohio State get to that level as well, that they know how to go about handling it.
For sure. And I was wondering, because you've called football, especially these last couple of years, primarily in January, deep into the college football playoff. What's the craziest travel schedule you've had when you also consider a crossover season with basketball?
Well, that's easy. 2018. All right. So I'm doing both basketball and I'm doing football. So in 2018, obviously the national championship game is on Monday in Santa Clara. The Saturday before that, I'm in Durham, North Carolina, calling Clemson Duke basketball. So I think that was an afternoon game. I think either a 2:00 or a 4:00. Spend the night there in Raleigh. Me and the guy that does color with me on both football and basketball, and our engineer, we all spend the night in Raleigh, get on a plane the next day, fly to Santa Clara, get into Santa Clara at noon West Coast time, which is 3:00 our time. It's raining sideways when we got there. So report to the team hotel, do a little thing that night there in Santa Clara, and then get up the next morning. The next morning, it's just a beautiful day. National championship game is that night. We win the national championship. We come back, celebrate in the hotel. We're up and after it at 7:00 the next morning, driving up to San Francisco to catch a plane to take us back to Syracuse to catch back up with the basketball team, who has a game on Wednesday. So we traveled all day Tuesday, get into Syracuse around 11:00 on Tuesday night, do the basketball game on Wednesday night, fly home with the basketball team on Wednesday evening, get in early Thursday morning. So that 5-day stretch was certainly as good as it gets. And then the other one, I guess the other one would be not this past year, but the year before, when we lost to LSU. We were in Chapel Hill for basketball, break that streak that had been there, the 56-game losing streak in Chapel Hill. That was on a Saturday. Get in a car on Sunday, drive to New Orleans, do the game Monday night, and then get up early Tuesday morning, have to be back in Clemson for a game against Duke that's at 6:00 in the evening. So we pull into Clemson around 4:30 in the afternoon, and then turn around and do a basketball game. We're on air at 5:30 and do a 6:00 basketball. So we see us win at North Carolina, beat Duke, lose the national championship. And I think if you had asked any Clemson fan anywhere, they would have told you it was going to be exactly the opposite. But it wasn't. That's just that's why I love sports. That's why I love doing what I do, and blessed to be here where I am.
That's definitely awesome. And I was wondering, Don, how do you prep for a game? Let's say you've got a regular season Clemson game against some opponent. How do you prep for that game, and how does that differ once you get to the college football playoff?
Well, you try to make it. You don't make it differ when it gets to the playoffs. If anything, you actually simplify it when you get to a playoff or an ACC championship game, or a game that maybe even just for a divisional championship or something along. Because myself, I've always been a big believer in that the game itself is the story. So you're going to do all this prep work, and yes, I will call all the notes. All right. So you get the notes that the SIDs, the sports information directors at both schools will put out. For football, by the end of the season, those are usually 50, 60 pages thick. All right. So they have notes on everything. Just everything. So then I do my spot boards, and my spot boards take me usually about 2 days to get complete. both on Clemson and the opponent. So filling all that stuff out. And then usually, then I start going in, and I like to hand write on my spot boards little tidbits for every player and that. And so you do all this preparation, and usually in a game, I may get to 15% of it, maybe 15% of everything that is there, because I'm so focused on my job as a play-by-play guy is to what's going on, where's the ball, what's the time, what's the score, all of that. It's up to the people that are working with me to kind of help fill in the rest of the dots and the rest of the paint by numbers, so to speak, stuff that happens there. And so there has to be, great chemistry in football. There's three of us that are working on there. There has to be great chemistry among the three of us, and each of us now kind of knows, what the role is, and we kind of have the vibe of who wants to say what at what time, and all that kind of stuff. So it's just one of those things. I was blessed to do. I went to Appalachian State, was blessed to get into play-by-play immediately after I graduated in 1984. So I've been doing this for a while, and you learn more and more and more, and then you also pick up more and more and more just from watching others and that type of thing. Bill Roth, who's right there, obviously with you all, is a guy that there's always eyes on you. Bill will probably tell you this. There's people watching you, even though you don't know. There's always eyes. There's always ears on you. Bill is one of those guys I can remember when I was coming up and starting to do all this, and then even at Clemson, you listen to Sirius XM is a wonderful thing. You get to listen to everybody, and you put little tidbits, and you put, hey, I like what he's doing here. I like what this guy does here, and you put those things away, and then you just try to do it the best you can. And I'm still working. I'm not complete. I want to get better, and the COVID has been great because I've had to call games now off of screens. I never thought that I would have to do that off of a monitor, but it makes you better, so you embrace it.
That's awesome. And I was wondering, how do you prep for basketball? And I guess a bigger question for that is, how are you prepping during those crazy schedules when you're talking about you've got a national championship game, you've got basketball games? I mean, how do you find the time between all the travel and trying to sleep to be able to prep for these games?
Well, I mean, you just do it, and I love it. I mean, I'm in a if it had not been for the COVID pause right now at Clemson, I'm in a point now where I've got a radio show tonight with our basketball coach. So been doing already some prep work for that. It's just an hour-long show, 7 to 8 o'clock. So I got that. I'll have won't have any broadcast tomorrow, but then I was going to have a basketball game on Wednesday. I have two softball games here at home on Thursday, a doubleheader in softball. Baseball starts for us on Friday. So I have a baseball game on Friday, a baseball game on Saturday, another basketball game on Sunday. A week from today, another radio show with our head basketball coach. And then it's time for me to come up for air on Tuesday. But I love it. I mean, that's you ask any broadcaster, that's the way they want it. So when you're in this deep, what happens is that you can't necessarily work that much ahead, because notes don't come out that far ahead. So what you learn to do is get your sleep when you can. And I'm a guy that 6 to 8 hours is usually what I need, and then get up in the morning, and you better be ready to go now, full bore. You better put 100% into it that day, because you're going to get a lot done before you even think about showing up to a football stadium or a baseball stadium or a basketball arena, because you got to get a lot done.
I have to ask you, what are some of your favorite football stadiums to travel to and do a game? I mean, you've been all over the country. And then a second part to that is, as a Virginia Tech student, I was curious, how does Lane Stadium rank in those visits?
Well, Lane Stadium is a lot of fun. I won't lie about that. Obviously, there's such an aura, of coming to that stadium. When I was at App, one of the first road trips as a student that I ever made, I believe we came up there and played. Appalachian State played there in either '82 or '83. Bruce Smith was still playing there at that, and that was the reason that we wanted to make the road trip. Now, App got just shelled. I mean, they just got absolutely obliterated by Virginia Tech. So that was my first foray there into Lane Stadium, and then to kind of see how it's changed over the years, to what it is now. I love everything about Virginia Tech's campus, the Hokie Stone, the way that all the buildings are all the arch, the memorial that they had to the students that, in the unfortunate shooting there on campus. I love everything about that. So there's just something about when you step into a place like that, and it's a lot like Clemson. There's a lot of land mass, a lot of land area that's there, and so I think that helps, actually build into an atmosphere going into a Saturday football game, and that certainly is true there at Virginia Tech. As far as stadiums are concerned, I won't lie to you, doing games in Dallas is a ton of fun. I mean, just because of the big video board and everything that is about Jerry World there in AT&T Stadium. I've been fortunate when I have been there to call games. They have put us actually in the Dallas Cowboy radio booth. So that has its own advantages. You can imagine, since it's the home booth, and it's just a huge booth. And, now most professional stadiums, you're in the corner as opposed to being at the 50 and that kind of stuff. I do like going to Miami and doing games there just because, again, weather, not going to lie to you, weather is great there, but also that box, you're there on the 50-yard line. Going to Athens, Georgia, and doing a game certainly there in Sanford Stadium is a ton of fun. But like stadiums like Wake Forest, I think is very undersold because that stadium is smaller, but you're right on top of the action, and I love everything about that as well. And then of course at Memorial Stadium at home at Death Valley in Clemson, I don't think that the atmosphere gets any better. And I realize I'm biased and I look at it through orange-colored glasses, but I love every bit of it, of doing games there.
That's awesome. And I have to ask you, what are some of your favorite basketball memories? I mean, some of those NCAA tournament runs, I have to think about breaking the streak at Chapel Hill after so many years. Those are got to be right up there for you.
Well, and I won't lie to you. I had been telling my wife for a long, long time that I hope that I'm on the mic when Clemson breaks the streak at North Carolina, and thank the Lord above that He let me be there for that. So that definitely, from a basketball standpoint, I think has to be one of the shining moments. Certainly, the run to the Sweet 16, the way that Clemson beat down Auburn out in San Diego was just shocking. The guy that does color with me is a fellow by the name of Tim Beret. He's been covering Clemson athletics for 40 plus years, and he said on there, that's the best that he'd ever seen any Clemson basketball team play ever. And they just shelled poor. And that was a really good Auburn basketball team. They made a really good Auburn basketball team. To see us, beat the Dukes of the world. We had a streak last year where we beat, 3 top 10 teams at home. So there was a storming of the court, that happened after all of that. And that's right now in this era, that's the thing that I miss the most, is that there's not a crowd, and I miss the feel of sound. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you will as a broadcaster, because there is a feel to a crowd. There is a feel to the sound and the electricity that is generated, especially when it's in a game like that. And when you have a rivalry game or a championship game, there's just something extra about it. And so those would be the things that I would tell you from the memory banks. I am 59, so I probably am forgetting something somewhere along the line.
That's awesome. And Don, you've been so gracious with your time. So I have 2 final questions for you. My first one is, what's your advice to young broadcasters trying to make it during this pandemic? I mean, better than anyone, it's already a competitive business, and now we have to deal with the realities of this pandemic. So what's your advice to young guys and girls like me who want to make it in this business, but have to deal with the realities of the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, first and foremost, patience is a virtue. All right. And I realized, believe me, I was there. I worked at a student radio station at App. So I know. And I had these grandiose visions of what I was going to do when I got out. But be willing to do everything, be willing to do it all. You don't have to just be behind the mic or in front of the camera. You need to learn how to do everything. You need to learn how to produce. You need to learn how to write. You need to learn how to edit. You need to learn how to shoot. And when I mean shoot, I don't mean just video. I mean also photography. You need to learn how to go about setting up, shots. What are, how to frame stuff. You need to know all of that. You need to know how to set up your audio equipment, how it runs, why it runs, all of that stuff. You need to know how to engineer all of it. I've done all of that in my broadcast, and it has helped me to no ends. Because if you're just focusing on one thing and one thing only, you're only going to be that portion of who you can be. But if you learn to have your hands in it all, then you can do it all. But the best thing that I will tell you, the best thing and this is what comes from my faith, you better be willing to wash somebody else's feet. And you better be willing to do it every day. The more you serve, the more bridges you will build, the more relationships you will find. And I'm telling you, this is a relationship business. Your relationships will get you jobs. I can tell you, I've had probably about 10, 11 jobs in my life. Only 2 have I ever applied for. The others, it's always been somebody calling me and saying, hey, would you be interested in that? When I went to work for Dabo Swinney at Clemson, I didn't apply for anything. Coach Swinney knew me. We had a relationship. He actually called me as I was this was in 2010 at the College World Series in Omaha, calling games for Clemson. He actually called me the first day that I got there and said, would you be interested in coming to work for me? And so it was the relationship. Relationships, I'm telling you, are everything. Build as many of them as you can, but also do it with a servant attitude. And you're going to find that it carries you much further than you ever dreamed of. Be kind to everybody. Don't burn bridges.
That's awesome to hear, Don. And my final question for you is, I mean, you've done so much in your career, and it's been an impressive run, these last, 7, 8 years as the play-by-play voice of the Tigers. I mean, do you ever have a chance to just reflect on your career and think, man, I got to call 2 national championships, maybe more in the future, a Sweet 16 run, March Madness tournament runs? Do you ever just think about and reflect on your career? I mean, are you pretty content with where it's gone? Is there something you'd like to do in 10 years? I mean, how do you just process all of that as you try to reflect on your career, maybe from time to time?
Oh no, there's still stuff that I want to do. There's still stuff that I want to see. No, make no mistake about it. But and it's funny because I have very close contacts from my high school days and from certainly my college days, and I talk with a lot of my buds, during the week. I mean, a lot of time, or they'll call me, on the road after a game on my cell phone as I'm driving home or whatever. And since it's I have to pinch myself that since 2015. I don't know anything else other than going to the college football playoff. I mean, that's stupid. That's stupid. I've called Cotton Bowls, I've called Orange Bowls, I've called Fiesta Bowls. The thing I want to do is call a Rose Bowl. I thought maybe this would be the year that I would get to call a Rose Bowl game, but the pandemic got in the way of that. And then it turned out to obviously be in Dallas. Only other time it had been outside of Pasadena is 1942 when they held it in Duke. Because of the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor in 41. There's plenty of things. I would like to do at some point probably Major League Baseball. I have interviewed with several teams, have had an opportunity in that, not necessarily the last one to an actual job offer, but I've been in the last 2 or 3 with a couple of major league teams. And that, do I want to make that step now? I don't think that I do, because I arguably have the best job in college sports broadcasting right now. I will argue that with the fact that I work for the university and all the things that come along with that, it makes working at Clemson and covering what I'm covering right now, I don't know that I could find a better situation for it. But yeah, there's some things that I would still like to do. I'm hoping that I'm not done. Like I said, I'm 59. We have many in our business that are doing this into their 70s. Heck, Johnny Holiday at Maryland is in his early 80s and still just knocking it out of the ballpark. And Johnny's actually a really good friend of mine from that standpoint. So yeah, I'm hoping that I can do. I have told my wife 2036 is kind of the year that I have circled. I'll be 74 at that time. We have a series that'll wrap up with Oklahoma right now that is on the calendar, a 2-game series. And I kind of, that's in my mind. All right, if I can make it to that point, then I think I'll be able to, look back and be very satisfied. Although I must admit, God has blessed me richly. I mean, He has blessed me richly, and I could go right now and be very, very happy with what I've done in my life.
Don, this has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you, get to hear all the stories related to Clemson, and of course, you being an App State grad, so the Virginia Tech community and campus very well. It's just been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely appreciate you having me on. Let me spread a little gospel of the Clemson Tigers up there in Hokie land.
For sure. Well, that's Mr. Don Munson, the voice of the Clemson Tigers. Like I mentioned, a former App State grad as well. This has been the latest edition of Pulse with BP. Thanks so much to him for joining me. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. We'll see you next time.